Hello and welcome to part 2 of this 2-part ForgeTalk mini-series on ForgeRock Go. In part 1, we looked at ForgeRock Go and how it enables some great usernameless and passwordless user experiences out of the box. But there's obviously more to the user journey than just authentication. So I'm joined again by Frank and Ben to talk about how ForgeRock's Intelligent Access, which evolved out of ForgeRock Intelligent Authentication, and the ForgeRock Trust Network really enables even more incredible things throughout the user experience. So guys, thank you for joining me again and talk to me. You know, what's the deal? How does ForgeRock enable even greater user experiences?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us again, Fraser. It's truly a dream to be here.
You're welcome.
And one of the things that you said how intelligent access kind of originated from intelligent authentication. Well, authentication is just part of the journey. There's other parts that are really important. For example, origination or registration. So when you originally bring that user into your system, and things like self-service as well are super important.
Sure.
And so those are parts of the journey which can't be forgotten.
And so what are some of the issues then that customers are seeing when it comes to onboarding, and why do they need intelligence there?
That's a great question. So, just like we talked about when we talked about authentication, that, there's kind of a balancing act between usability and security. And origination or registration is no different. So one of the things that a lot of our customers are grappling with today is they don't want to just let anybody onboard into their system. They want to make sure that, for example, a person is who they say they are. They want to understand the risk associated with a particular user. But the problem is, when you're registering a user, that process, if you ask them too many questions, if you put them through, too many hoops to jump through in order to get access, they're going to abandon, right? And so what our customers are dealing with is, how do they gather information? How do they do the type of vetting they need to make sure that a user is secure, but do it in a way that doesn't introduce friction that causes them to go leave? Because, who amongst us hasn't gone to go do something on a website and then all of a sudden a registration form pops up and we're like, nope, we're out, right? And so I think it's really important that we figure out a way to balance this. And so if we bring intelligence into the mix, now what we can do is we can have two users, one who is potentially a low-risk user, and another user who potentially represents higher risk, whether they're trying to create a fake identity or whether they have a history of being involved in fraud. Well, we can have both of those users enter our site at the same place, and we can actually, through signals that we get through the Trust Network, recognize which one is risky or which one is potentially fraudulent and which one isn't, and put them through a different experience. So the one that comes back as being known good or comes back as less risky, they almost get a fast lane into my system, where the user that comes back with some question marks, well, we're going to make that user jump through some additional hoops. We're going to make them answer some additional questions. We may challenge them a little further. And as a result, they may still get to the same end goal, but it may be harder for them to get to. That capability to customize and personalize the onboarding journey is really unique to ForgeRock, and it's a really exciting thing that we're now bringing to market as part of Intelligent Access. And the ability to bring in all of these signals from the Trust Network that can tell us whether a user is a real user, to tell us whether they've had a history of fraud, to tell us whether some of the information that they're providing to us is suspect. Well, that's really, really powerful. And so one of the things we can do is we can bring in a partner that does something like document verification and utilize that as part of the experience during registration. So we have a demo where we can show that if you're interested in seeing it.
I would love to see this demo, please.
I figured you would say that. So here it is.
OnFido is a document verification solution that makes it easy to quickly onboard new users with a high-level assurance that they are who they say they are. OnFido is fully integrated into ForgeRock authentication trees, which makes it easy to add document verification to any onboarding flow. After grabbing the 4 nodes we need to design this registration flow, we'll wire them together and test it out. First, we'll just type in our desired username. Next, we'll be prompted to verify our identity, either with a passport, driver's license, or identity card. So we'll use a driver's license. First, I'll upload the front of my driver's license. Next, I'll upload the back of my driver's license. And then, once our identity has been verified, we can create our password and create our account.
Well, that was a great demo. Thank you. You didn't disappoint.
I try not to.
I'm interested. What else does intelligent access do?
You know, we've talked about authentication in our last video. Now we talked about registration. But another important area that people sometimes don't think about is things like self-service and password resets. And we can bring intelligence there as well.
So why is it important to add intelligence to self-service as well?
So self-service is a key part of the user's lifecycle that often gets overlooked or thought of as less important than things like registration, origination, or authentication. These are actions like password resets, if you are using passwords, email address changes, home address changes, and they all need to be protected with different degrees of user friction depending on the application that the user's in. So these are all categorized as high risk for account takeover, meaning that if the user's account is taken over, the first thing that the bad guys are going to do are try and change these fields to take over your account. Because of that, ForgeRock gives customers the ability to assign these different intelligent access flows to these self-service actions in the same drag and drop experience.
Cool. So it sounds like we're covering the entire user journey. Is that what makes intelligent access so special?
It's definitely a huge piece of it, right? We're able to now utilize these tools to really orchestrate every aspect of the journey and personalize it and make it specific to a particular user, to make it specific to a certain situation. So, you know, two different users potentially accessing the same service, but they may be doing it from different devices on different locations and in different scenarios. We are smart enough now to understand that those users should get a different experience. And as Frank talked about, you know, we look at certain actions that are higher risk. If someone looks like they're doing the stuff that looks like an account takeover, well, guess what? We're going to step in and introduce friction that's going to make that harder to achieve.
Great.
The other thing that's really important is, you know, this is continuous. So it's not like, hey, we authenticate you and then we stop. We can really bring in a variety of tools from the Trust Network that ensure that the entire user journey is secure, including post-authentication. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that after a user authenticates, they continue to interact with my service. And I'm going to look at things like the device they're on and determine if that device is secure. And if I think it is, I may provide them a really streamlined experience. If I see that that device is questionable, I may once again introduce some friction. I also can even use tools like behavioral biometrics tools, which look at how you hold your phone, how you swipe, how you type on a keyboard, and look at kind of the unconscious things that a user does that makes them different.
That's cool.
And I can look at those things all the time and utilize that to make real-time decisions on whether or not a user is still secure. And so when we kind of layer all of these things together, from, you know, making sure that a person is who they say they are when they are registered or when they're originating, making sure that they authenticate in a passwordless, usernameless way with a tool like ForgeRock Go or one of our strong authentication partners, when they're interacting with different services and I'm making sure their device is secure, making sure their behavior is consistent. All of that journey is being evaluated. And then after all of that, when they go to try to change their address or change their password, we can take that into consideration to determine whether or not we're going to allow that to happen. This is how you have a, you know, kind of layered approach which provides a great user experience that also is as secure as it gets.
So you talk about that layered experience. I would love to see that kind of in action, or you know, learn a little bit more about that. Are you able to maybe talk about that a bit, Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple demonstrations here to show you.
Nice.
These are going to show you how ForgeRock technology partners add in that layered experience into the user's journey. These are one example of partners that we have in these different categories like behavioral biometrics or strong authentication. But as a part of the ForgeRock Trust Network, we're continuing to add and have over 80 partners that add their capabilities to our platform today.
All right, let's take a look at it.
BehavioSec is a behavioral biometric solution that can be configured via ForgeRock authentication trees. Here's how it works. First, we'll configure a standard username and password authentication tree. Next, we'll add the BehavioSec components so that we can analyze the way the user is typing and compare this against previous times that the user has logged in. Finally, we'll wire up all the nodes in the flow to get the desired user journey for this application. So let's see how that works. I'll type my username and password in a normal cadence, similar to the way I've done it in the past. I'm let into the system without issue because BehavioSec identified me by the way that I typed the credentials. Now let's log out and try to log back in a suspicious manner, typing much slower than usual. This time, the BehavioSec node identified me as risky and asks me to type the password in again. Dayon is a strong authentication partner in the ForgeRock Trust Network. They have a number of authentication nodes that make it easy to add Dayon's passwordless authentication to any application protected by the ForgeRock platform. Once we have all the nodes we need, we can just wire them together to get a fully functional biometric enrollment and authentication user journey. Now, let's save this tree and try it out from the user's perspective. To kick off authentication, all I need to do is type in my username. The authentication tree has identified that this is the first time I'm logging in and asks me to scan a QR code on my mobile device. First, I'll enter in a PIN, and then I'll authenticate with Face ID on my phone. Now in the future, every time I log in, I can use one of those out-of-band options to authenticate. Next is Threat Metrics. Threat Metrics is a device fraud and risk partner in the ForgeRock Trust Network. They integrate to the platform via authentication trees, which makes it easy to add device risk scoring to any registration, authentication, or authorization request. We'll grab all the Threat Metrics nodes that we need so that we can analyze the risk score that it returns and make a decision whether or not the user should be logged in or a stronger factor of authentication is required. Now that we've finished wiring all the nodes together, let's save the journey and we can try it out. First, I'm going to try to authenticate with the tree we've just built using a web browser which I've used to log in before, in this case, Chrome. I'll just type in my username and password and we'll be granted access without any friction. Next, I'll try to authenticate again, but this time I'll use a browser that I haven't used before, in this case, Safari. Again, I'll type in my username and password, but now you'll notice I'm getting a push notification sent to my mobile device. In the background, my device risk score was too high, so additional friction was required before I could be granted access.
Nice. I really enjoyed that. Obviously, I'm a big fan of a demo. Hopefully, everyone watching at home also found that really interesting and really enjoyable, as I'm sure you did. Guys, that's all we've really got time for today, but I really appreciate you joining me for this little two-part series to take us through all this stuff. Hopefully, you've enjoyed the conversation.
It's been a highlight of my existence.
Riveting.
Yeah,
I'm so glad. And guys, if you want to learn any more, then make sure you do get in touch. Someone at ForgeRock would be more than happy to talk through this stuff at length with you, and the contact details are on the screen right now. Otherwise, I'll just say thank you again, Frank and Ben.
Thank you, Fraser.
Thank you, Fraser.
And thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.